Forward TV. The world is thinking.
I want to start, and a little bit anecdotally. 2 or 3 years ago, I shared several bottles of red wine with somebody who's a minister, a junior minister, but a minister in the Chinese government. And we had quite a long discussion, mediated through a third person, a translator, or a colleague, but a translator, in which we discussed the nature of democracy. And afterwards, it occurred to me that the discussion was not so much culturally based, which was one of the arguments, but it was a very different conception of democracy, in which I was the old-fashioned one, assuming that it meant government of the people, by the people, for the people. And his conception of democracy owed much more to contemporary Western understandings, which perhaps bear more relationship to New Labour and Facebook conceptions a la Obama. And he was up to date, and I was very old-fashioned on the question of what democracy really is. So, what's going on in China, I think, in relationship to this subject, is an attempt to revisit, in peculiar circumstances, the classical issue of democracy, I think since the watershed, which I would locate sometime in the 1850s, 1860s, I refer again to, for example, Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, which is the relationship between the masses and the elite, and how the masses, or how the elite negotiate and renegotiate their relationship with the masses, the population, in order to get some form of political legitimacy, of which democracy seems to have become, at least in the Western imagination, the most pertinent or least painful version. But at the moment, that relationship between the masses and the elite, not only in China, but in the West, is either attenuated or non-existent. And China has arrived at that point precisely at the possibility of a change, precisely at the point when democracy is actually little understood anywhere else in the world. And so if they were looking for an example in the West, they wouldn't actually find it, except in historical documents. At the same time, what's happening in China, I think, is every single debate about the nature of democracy is being reproduced. Let me give you just 2 examples in relationship to that. So, for example, many of you will have heard about the rehabilitation of Confucius as a way of understanding Chinese society and transposing it to contemporary terms. What you might not have heard of, maybe you have, maybe you haven't, is that alongside Confucius, there's been a great interest inside Chinese intellectual academic circles with Leo Strauss and Carl Schmitt, who basically are the protagonists about the export of neoconservatism around the world. If you go back to Alan Bloom, The Closing of the American Mind, and their intellectual heritage is Plato. So you have Plato and Confucius as elements which are vying for our understanding about the way that China's society should develop. The common element, of course, is that the idea is that the elite, a self-sustained elite, perhaps a permeable elite, but certainly different, knows best. And they can then translate what's necessary in society through a process, i.e. it's an alien tradition to a contemporary modern political tradition, which does have its place in China. I mean, I don't want to rehearse this too much, but China has just as much of a 20th century history in the battle for democracy as any other country in the world.